The stern swung past the visual bearing much faster than I liked. We were already drifting 3 cables off our initial drop position before the chief officer could confirm the chain was tight. I watched the radar variable range marker. The distance to the tanker anchored astern was closing steadily. The wind had shifted abruptly, and our fully loaded hull was now broadside to the gusts, dragging the port anchor across the seabed. We were anchored in a designated waiting area off a busy coastal port, waiting for a berth. It was a Panamax bulk carrier fully loaded with grain, sitting deep in the water with a draft of 13 meters. The holding ground was charted as stiff mud, usually reliable, but the anchorage was crowded that week. I was on the bridge with the third officer. The weather had been calm all morning, but the barometer had dropped slightly in the last hour. Dark clouds were stacking up on the horizon, yet the forecast only predicted moderate breezes. We had 5 shackles of chain in the water on the port anchor. The ship felt heavy and sluggish, which is normal for a loaded bulk carrier, but it meant we carried a lot of momentum. This happened in 1998 on a routine commercial voyage. Before I tell you what happened next, please consider subscribing. It helps this channel reach more sailors. The third officer was at the chart table plotting our position every 5 minutes. He looked up and said the bearing to the lighthouse had changed 2 degrees in the last check. I walked out to the bridge wing. The wind hit my face harder than expected. It wasn't a breeze anymore, it was a solid force, 7 gusting to 8. The squall had arrived faster than we anticipated. I picked up the UHF radio and called the chief officer, who was already forward checking the gear. He reported that the chain was leading broad on the beam and vibrating heavily. That was a bad sign. It meant the anchor wasn't biting. It was skipping over the bottom. I called the engine room immediately. Bridge to engine room. Get the main engine ready. Immediate notice. The second engineer answered. He sounded calm but surprised. We were supposed to be at anchor for 3 days. He said he needed 10 minutes to blow through and get the air ready. Give me what you have as soon as you can, I said. We are dragging. I looked at the radar again. The tanker astern of us was a large VLCC in ballast, riding high. She was swinging differently than we were. Our stern was pointing right at her midship section. The distance was down to 5 cables. That sounds like a lot of room at sea, but in a dragging situation with a loaded ship, it disappears fast. The wind pushed our superstructure, acting like a sail, because we were loaded. The hull below the water offered massive resistance to the current, but the wind on the accommodation block was pivoting us. We were yawing, swinging side to side, which puts even more strain on the anchor chain. I told the third officer to put the helm hard over to starboard. I wanted to try and use the rudder to shear the stern away from the wind, maybe reduce the tension on the chain. It didn't do much. Without propeller wash, the rudder on a heavy ship is mostly useless. We just kept drifting. The chief officer called back, Captain, the brake is rendering. Tighten it up, I said, and it is tight, sir, but the chain is still jumping. The lining might be hot. This was a problem. If the windlass brake couldn't hold the tension, we couldn't stop the chain from paying out. If the chain ran out to the bitter end, we would lose the anchor, or worse, damage the bulkhead. Clear the crew from the forecastle, I ordered. Stay behind the breakwater. Do not touch the brake handle. The distance to the VLCC was now 4 cables. I could see her crew walking on deck. They had noticed us. Their bridge called us on VHF Channel 16. Motor vessel on my port bow. You are closing range. Please check your position. I am aware, I replied. We are maneuvering. It was a generous statement. We weren't maneuvering yet. We were just drifting with a heavy piece of iron bouncing on the bottom. The engine room called back. Air is ready, Captain. Engine ready for maneuvering. Finally, I needed to take the strain off the chain to let the anchor settle, or at least stop the drag. I ordered dead slow ahead. The engine kicked in with a low rumble that vibrated through the deck plates. I watched the rudder angle indicator. Midships, I said. The propeller wash started to bite. The ship stopped swinging for a moment, but as we moved forward, the chain led astern. We were moving up towards the anchor position. This should have been good, but the wind gusted again, pushing our bow to port. The hydrodynamics of a loaded ship in shallow water are tricky. As we moved forward, the pivot point of the ship shifted. The wind caught the bow, blowing it off. We started to turn broadside to the wind again, but this time with engine power pushing us. "Chain is leading round the knuckle," the chief officer shouted over the radio. The chain was cutting across the sharp steel edge of the bow hawse pipe. If it stayed there under tension, a link could part. I stopped the engine. We drifted back. The drag continued. The distance to the VLCC was 3.5 cables. We weren't holding. The anchor was just a heavy weight dragging through the mud, and the brake was smoking. We were sliding sideways, closing the gap, and the squall showed no sign of stopping. The drift accelerated as the squall peaked. The chief officer reported over the radio that the brake lining smelled like burning asbestos. The drum was too hot to tighten further without risking the screw mechanism jamming permanently. The chain paid out another half shackle on its own before jamming momentarily in the chain stopper. This violent jerk shook the entire forecastle and sent a vibration right up through the bridge deck. Chain leading 7 o'clock. Heavy. "Strain!" the chief yelled. The chain was cutting under the hull. "This is dangerous. If the chain rubs against the bulbous bow or the keel, it damages the steel plating. If it gets near the intake for the bow thruster or drifts aft toward the propeller, the situation becomes critical." The VLCC called again on the VHF. "You are 3 cables. What are your intentions?" "I am using engine to clear you," I replied. I kept my voice flat. I ordered slow ahead again. The engine took a few seconds to fire. On older ships, that lag can feel very long. The wind was pushing the bow further to port, exposing more of the ship's side to the squall. We were sliding sideways toward the tanker's bulbous bow. The radar rings showed the gap closing. We were not just drifting back, we were being set down onto them. The RPM indicator climbed slowly. The propeller wash finally hit the rudder, giving me some steerage. "Hard to starboard," I ordered. I needed to twist the stern away from the VLCC. With the anchor dragging on the port bow, going ahead with hard starboard rudder should pivot the ship. The anchor holds the bow back while the engine swings the stern. It is a standard maneuver known as dredging, but it requires the anchor to actually offer some resistance. Since ours was bouncing over the seabed, the pivot point was unpredictable. The stern began to swing slowly to port, away from the tanker, but we were still closing the distance due to the sideways drift. 2 cables now. I could see the rust streaks on the VLCC's hull clearly with my binoculars. I could see their crew pointing at us. "Half ahead," I said. This was a calculated risk. Half ahead on a loaded Panamax builds speed slowly. But once you have momentum in a roadstead, it is hard to stop. If we cleared the VLCC but couldn't stop the vessel, we might run into the shallow patches marked on the chart behind her. But at that moment, the collision risk was the priority. "Chain leading 9 o'clock, medium strain," the chief reported. This was better. The chain was moving to the beam. We were turning into the wind. The vibration from the dragging anchor rumbled through the ship. It sounded like a heavy train passing on a track beneath our feet. The distance to the VLCC stabilized at 1.8 cables. We were parallel to her now, passing close down her starboard side. The gap was uncomfortable, but it was opening. Midships. Steady so. I kept the engine on half ahead. We needed to punch through the wind to get clear sea room. The rain started then, heavy tropical rain that obscured the window glass. I switched on the wipers. The radar picture got cluttered with rain scatter. I had to adjust the anti-clutter setting carefully to keep the VLCC echo distinct from the noise. "Captain, the windlass brake is smoking heavily," the chief said. We cannot heave up. The hydraulic pressure is also fluctuating." "Do not heave up," I replied. "Let it drag. Just watch the chain. If we tried to heave up now, the hydraulic motor would stall, or the windlass gear might shear under the tension. We had to drag the anchor into safer water. We were effectively using the anchor as a poor man's tug, letting it drag along the bottom to check our speed while we used the engine to steer. "How would you handle this from the bridge?" I watched the speed log. We were making 2 knots over the ground. The drag was slowing us down, acting like a brake. We cleared the VLCC's stern. I saw her propeller wash. She was using her engine to maintain her own position against the squall. We were now in the open channel between 2 rows of anchored ships. "Slow ahead," I ordered. I didn't want to overshoot. The depth here was 20 meters. We were safe from grounding, but I couldn't drag the anchor forever. The brake lining was failing, and if the chain ran out to the bitter end, we would damage the chain locker. "Chief, how is the chain?" "Leading 8 o'clock. Long stay. It is jumping less." We were moving into an area with slightly better holding ground, closer to the port limit. The squall was still blowing, but the rain eased slightly. I had to make a decision: drop the starboard anchor to stop us, or try to turn the ship 180 degrees into the wind and hold position on the engine until the weather passed. Dropping the starboard anchor while moving at 2 knots with the port anchor dragging is risky. You can foul the hawse or cross the chains. I decided to turn. "Hard to port," I said. I wanted to bring the bow through the wind. The port anchor was already on the port side. By turning to port, I kept the chain clear of the hull. The drag of the port anchor would actually help pull the bow round. The ship responded sluggishly. The wind fought the bow. It took 5 minutes for the gyro compass to show a steady swing. "Chain is leading 12 o'clock, the chief shouted. "Dead slow ahead." We were facing the wind now. The combined force of the engine and the head-to-wind profile slowed our drift. The chain settled. The heavy jumping stopped. We were holding position against the wind, using the engine to assist the dragging anchor. The VLCC was now safely 4 cables astern and opening. The immediate danger of contact was over, but we were still not secure. The squall moved east as quickly as it had arrived. Within 20 minutes, the wind speed dropped from force 8 back to force 5. The heavy tropical rain turned into a light drizzle, and the visibility opened up enough to see the breakwater lights clearly again. I kept the engine on dead slow ahead for another 10 minutes. We needed to be sure the vessel had stopped dragging completely before we attempted to touch the gear. The radar picture confirmed we were holding position. The variable range marker on the breakwater remained steady at 1.5 miles. We were safe, but we were now anchoring in a position that hadn't been assigned to us. I picked up the handset for the VTS channel. "Port control, this is the vessel. We have stopped dragging. We are currently holding position." The VTS operator answered immediately. "We observed your track. You are currently obstructing the approach lane for the container terminal. What are your intentions?" "I intend to heave up and return to our designated anchorage position," I replied. "I require 30 minutes to clear the gear." "Copy. Keep a listening watch on Channel 12. I called the chief officer on the UHF. "Chief, what is the situation forward?" "The brake drum is cooling down, Captain," he said. "Yeah, we have been running water over it with the fire hose. The smoke has stopped." "Very good. Engage the gear. Let's try to get it back." This was the delicate part. We had 6 shackles of chain out, almost 165 meters, and it was lying in deep mud. The windlass motor would have to pull the dead weight of the chain plus break the suction of the anchor in the seabed. If the hydraulic system was already hot, we risked tripping the pump or blowing a seal. "Gear engaged," the chief reported, "ready to heave." "Heave away. Tell me the load." "Heaving. Our amps are high. It is straining." I nudged the telegraph to dead slow ahead again. "I am giving you a kick ahead. Let me know when the chain becomes vertical." By using the engine, I moved the ship slowly toward the anchor's position on the bottom. This took the weight of the ship off the chain, so the windlass only had to lift the steel links, not pull the hull through the water. It requires careful coordination. If I moved too fast, the chain would go slack and loop under the bulbous bow. If I moved too slow, the windlass would stall. "Chain is up and down," the chief called. "Heaving is easier now." "Stop engine." We worked like that for 20 minutes. Heave, stop to let the hydraulics cool, kick the engine ahead, heave again. It was slow, methodical work. The chain came up through the hawse pipe thick with gray clay. The deck crew used the wash deck hose to blast the mud off the links before they entered the chain locker. You don't want that much mud building up in the locker. It blocks the drainage and causes corrosion. When the 3rd shackle came on deck, the chief stopped the operation. "Captain, inspecting the joiner shackle. It looks okay. No distortion." "Carry on." We finally recovered the anchor. It broke surface with a heavy splash, a massive ball of mud clinging to the flukes. "Anchor away," the chief reported. "Lights are off. Day shape is down." We were underway. I maneuvered the ship back to our original position 3 miles to the north. The traffic was still busy, but the squall had cleared the smaller fishing boats out of the area. We approached the drop point slowly. I decided to use the starboard anchor this time. The port windlass had taken enough punishment for one day. We lined up the approach, stemming the tide. "Let go starboard anchor." The chain roared out. We paid out 5 shackles. The ship settled. I waited for 20 minutes to confirm we were brought up. The bearings didn't move. The chief officer put the brake on and secured the guillotine bar. "Anchor ball is up," he said. "We are secure." I sent the second officer down to sound the tanks. Even though we had only dragged through mud, it is standard procedure to check the forepeak and collision bulkhead for any water ingress. You never know if there was a rock hidden in that mud or if the chain damage was worse than it looked. The soundings came back dry. The bilges were clear. The ship was back to a normal routine. I went down to my office and logged the incident in the deck logbook. Vessel dragged anchor due to sudden squall. Main engine used, shifted position, re-anchored safely. We remained at anchor for another 4 days before a berth opened up. The weather stayed moderate, force 3 to 4 with no further incidents. The next morning, the chief engineer and the chief officer opened up the port windlass brake for a proper inspection. They found the brake linings were heavily glazed. The heat from the friction during the drag had baked the surface of the lining until it was smooth and shiny, like glass. When a lining gets glazed, it loses its friction coefficient. No matter how hard you screw down the brake handle, it won't hold the drum securely. We had spare linings on board. The crew spent the day stripping the brake band and riveting on the new material. It's a messy, dusty job, but necessary. We also checked the hydraulic oil. It was burnt and needed changing, likely from the high temperature during the heaving operation. The cause was a combination of factors. The squall was stronger than forecast, the holding ground was softer than the chart suggested, and the brake linings were near the end of their service life. It is a common enough occurrence on older bulk carriers. The windage area of a loaded superstructure is significant, and once the momentum starts, the anchor is often just a passenger. The company sent a fleet circular a month later, reminding masters to keep engines on immediate notice when at anchor in open roadsteads. It was a standard response. We didn't need the reminder. The smell of burning brake lining was memory enough. If you've experienced something similar, I'd like to hear it.